Welcome to Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment, a podcast by Chefalo Consulting, where we share the knowledge, stories, and resources you need to create a trauma-informed culture that supports wellness, growth, and resilience. I'm your host, Shenandoah Chefalo. Welcome on today's episode, Reverend Dr. Sanghoon, a visionary leader and founder of the Faithful City in Arizona Trauma-Informed Faith Coalition, with over 2 decades of dedicated service in ministries and social services around Arizona and the Phoenix metropolitan area. Dr. Yu brings a rich background in social work and ministry to his efforts in integrating trauma-informed care within faith-based communities. His work emphasizes building resilient, inclusive communities that support holistic healing and empowerment. He's also a key player in national movements to advance trauma-informed policies and practices, making him a pivotal figure in creating environments where people find belonging and support. Join us as we explore his transformative approaches to fostering communities that not only survive, but thrive. And maybe most importantly, he is also a Michigan State University graduate. We share this in common. It's how we originally are connected. So welcome, Sanghoon. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Shan, and our Spartan alumni. You see me, I have a green shirt even today.
I know. You're rocking. The real football season hasn't started, but I am actually truly honored to have you as a guest because I know how important trauma-informed work is to you. I can't wait for our listeners to hear about all the amazing things that you're doing in Phoenix and Arizona. But kind of before we get into your work in communities, one of the first things I always like to ask is not so much the destination, all the accomplishments you have, which are always important, but I like to know about my guests' journeys sometimes. So, what inspired you to focus on trauma-informed care in the faith-based setting, and what led you down this path to start with?
Thank you, Shan. Actually, the Michigan State University is my first place. I came from South Korea with my wife and 6-month-old baby to study the social work there. And then after my degree, I moved down to the Arizona because my advisor moved down to the Arizona State University while I'm trying to continue my own PhD work. And meanwhile, I found that my calling was actually becoming a pastor. And so I dropped the ball there, and then I became a full-time pastor, founded the Faithful City as campus ministry, and I worked a lot in the community as associate pastor. However, as time went by, I got involved again with all the community work, and then we call it as a vicarious trauma. So a lot of trauma story affected me, and I went through my own trauma season. It ended up almost, I'm losing my life with the suicidal ideations and other things. So it was very devastated because I came here and then I thought I did everything what I could do, changing my career path and everything, but I felt like I didn't work it out. At the time, accidentally, I went to, I think maybe divine appointment. I went to Washington, D.C., where I met a trauma-informed congregation conference. Somebody did it, and I was surprised. Wow, I never heard that mental health trauma church and pastors can work together. That's why I just said goodbye to social work and gonna dedicate myself to the church. But I was in horrible trouble. I got jumped into the trauma-informed care movement and learning about brain and neuroscience and everything. And then when I heard, then somebody said, for the trauma-informed care and recovery, we need unconditional love, compassion with the one person with a constant care. And that made me think, wait a minute, that's what I'm doing as a faith leader. Wow, there's a certain space that faith and science and church and faith community and mental health areas can come together. And so that made me joyful. And then through all this training, everything, and I'm still recovering from my own trauma, the whole healing journey is the most important thing for me to be very passionate, whatever I accomplish or not. And then I came back to Arizona and joined the Arizona ACES Consortium, which has been 2 decades of statewide authority for the movement. So we worked together with all other sectors and also training all the other sectors, including government and schools and education and business and all other sectors, and mental health and social service, because the trauma-informed care has been a buzzword. We did everything what we could do, and then from last year, actually, God also restored my ministry, my organization. So, with all our collaboration through decades, the Maricopa County Department of Public Health granted me award to have a fund to reach out all the faith communities and to create communities of belonging, which is my project name, with a trauma-informed care lens to prevent substance use and all those things. So it's very personally involved and connected. And also it opened the door for my 180 degree of my career path. And then, as you said, surviving and thriving kind of a testimony. But that's who I am, what happened to me.
First, we always appreciate you just being vulnerable enough to share the personal piece, right? Because I think, especially when we're talking about in the business sector or in the faith sector, although a lot of leaders, and we know Brene Brown talks about this quite often, though, about vulnerability, when you're the person doing it, it's hard, right? Like, it's so easy to tell other people to be vulnerable, but it's hard when it's you who has to be vulnerable. And so, as a person who often teaches and talks from that first person lens of lived experience, I just first want to hold some time to tell you how much I appreciate you sharing with us, because I know how many of our listeners are in their own trauma space right now as they listen to this. Maybe they may feel alone, but also that the reason they're doing the work that they do is because of their experience or their family members' experience. And so just appreciate your sharing your story with us. The other thing that I think is so crucial is that attending trauma informed in the faith perspective, when we talk about resilience, which is the second buzzword, right? Trauma informed followed by resilience, that Harvard told us there's three ways to build resilience. One, a connection to a stable adult. That's one way in which we can build our resilience. Two, mastery of skills. We know that helps rewire our brain and to do all kinds of fun things. But the third one is a connection to faith or spirituality. And so I love that you're talking about, hey, in the realm of religion and the realm of church and spirituality, we're doing this trauma informed lens. And so I'm sort of wondering, because your work has often centered on weaving these diverse groups into cohesive communities, maybe you can share a couple of your foundational principles that guide your approach to creating communities of belonging. Because for many people, sometimes the church doesn't feel welcoming or that they belong necessarily, or they've been harmed before in church or religious type settings. So could you share with us some of your principles that you think about when doing that?
I think we all have a belief system. It can be a higher power or God and certain name of God. And thank you for sharing about the three perspective of the resilience. But also another buzzword is the post-traumatic growth. People talking about a lot. And then also it also talking about in the process of a post-traumatic growth, we open the door to a new spirituality. I think the most important thing is that as a survivor, people who are feeling so lonely, we need to use it as a chance, opportunities to go deeper spiritual realm that's in terms of who I am. And is there any higher being I need to rely on? For me, I desperately need it. And so I recommend that anybody and everybody can find that someone as a higher being to depend on. And my relationship with that higher being is very important. And as you said, we talk about the one person with a constant care who provides safety an opportunity of a ventilation and validation. So we call this as a community. So I believe in my own triune God and God of Trinity. Likewise, also God and me and somebody, or if there can be more people than just a somebody as a community, that's the better or best. And with that, it's very important we know the best way of the trauma healing and resilience comes out of the connectivity. So we need to be connected spiritually, but also we need to be connected through our mind and body and soul and community living together. But the step might be just a kind of gradual. You cannot just start everything at the same time. I call this our movement as a very countercultural, which means we are against the current culture I see as a very toxic, which means we are in the culture of everything and all successful things must be very fast, powerful, and reaching out everybody in short time, all or nothing, and they should be perfect. I think the perfectionism, right? Those things are really kind of a toxic culture. So in the trauma, we're talking about toxic stress. But however, if we don't know how to fight against this toxic culture, then actually we feel like a very defeated because I'm getting out of counseling room, I'm getting out of my healing process. And then when you go to market and you meet your boss and whoever. So that's why it's very important. Separate your time, not for the being alone, but having a solitude. Solitude with yourself, solitude with a higher being. You can engage more deeper spiritual journey together. And out of this, I hope you find the safety and unconditional acceptance of yourself by the divinity, the divine being. And then with that, with the safe ground, and then we feel like when I feel safe, then I have more courage to reach out somebody and to get engaged with another safe person. I can start the community living together. In order to do that, it's very important that actually you talk about the vulnerability. But to me, it's really based on how you look at it. To certain people, vulnerability, very shameful things and very weakness. And so you don't want to talk about it. You want to hide it. But for me, actually, vulnerability is opportunity that actually give me more resilience and the strength because through this, I see myself, I'm surviving. For example, when I do my own conference, one of the slogan is that it's all Sanghoon's fault. And even my friend made a T-shirt saying it's all Sanghoon's fault. Because whenever something happens, I instead of increasing another meeting, I just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's all Sanghoon's fault," and so it's on me, and let's move on. Let me tell you this, because it's all Sanghoon's fault was one of the key narrative that really made me suicidal because I did so wrong. I'm so ashamed. But with my healing and resilience, now I'm using the same phrase actually to bring people feel more safe and accept it. It's okay not to be okay. So that's the amazing thing is that I didn't know, but I found later, whoa, wait a minute. This phrase is a word to almost kill me, but now I'm using it to be resilient for myself and then using it for my movement to bring all people together. So being vulnerable and then being in place of shame can be also a starting point that maybe God will use it. You know what? This might be the momentum that I can start to build post-traumatic growth out of it, then I can survive and thrive instead of trying to keep hiding it. I want to tell you that then whatever I think is a weakness or whatever I think is shame, it will turn out to be an opportunity to survive and thrive. And for my own religion, my scripture is totally validated. So that's why I'm so serious about my relationship with my God and my scripture, and we can build it. And then out of this, we build a community of belonging. Why? Because this is not about any religion. It's about science. Because when our brain, neural system recognize the sense of belonging, we feel safe. And then belonging and safety is the most important foundation then where the healing starts for the trauma survivors. So that's why it's important that we make a space where people can be vulnerable and they can be honest, as you said, and accepted as they are, whatever they did. And so whenever I say about safety, I emphasize this because there are a lot of education about safety. And then people try to be sensitive. Out of this, what I found is that, oh my gosh, I cannot say this, I cannot do that. I don't know what to do. They just give up. But for my movement, the definition of a safety is actually, although we bring uncomfortable dialogue, we still feel safe because we are still accepted and celebrated. So it's really like, it's not about what not to do, but it's more about how you're going to respond, whatever you hear, whatever you have. That's about the resilience. And then I separate the concept between resilience and success. As we are more about success is more goal oriented. You know what I mean? That means that I just set the goal, within a certain time frame, I'm gonna achieve the goal. That's success. We are all about this. That's why I call this a toxic culture. I want to see more resilient culture because the resilience meaning is that I'm recharging my energy every day, whatever I face today. It can be successful or it can feel like a failure. It doesn't matter. I don't change who I am because I'm recovered, restored as who I am. Also, no shame, no fear, no guilt. And then from now on, I'm gonna just face it. And because who I am is more important than what I can do, what I should do. And this is really from my trauma healing as a Christ-centered for me, for my religion. That in the Christ-centered trauma-informed care, it really affected me that way. And so I love to be resilient than just to try to be successful.
So, when we're talking about those foundation principles, so you said safety, vulnerability, and then resilience, which I love. And I love your idea about resilience versus success, because I do think people get confused by those two things quite often. But the other thing you said in there that just resonates so deeply with me is really that embracing the paradox. So, that's the realm that I always look at it, which is two things can be true at the same time, right? Is that I can be in pain, but the pain can also be really beautiful. And I can be resilient, and that can also be very painful. There's these two things happening at once. And what might be intriguing for our listeners who know, and you and I have had this conversation before too, is that I would never consider myself religious in the traditional sense. I would consider myself a non-believer if people asked, right? And then they're like, "How are you and Sanghoon getting along so well? Why do you even listen to what this guy has to say who's coming from this faith background?" And the thing that I always say is because we're talking the exact same thing, because we're saying the exact same things. And that's what makes you safe for me. And what I think makes me safe for you is at the end of the day, we believe in the same piece, which is kind of the beauty of each other and the beauty to heal. And so I'm just wondering how you think your background, not just your personal experience, but in social work and ministry, synergizes to address some of those challenges faced in communities every day, especially I think in today's world where everything seems so politicized and left or right. How do we get people to come together to say it's really about being humans centered first?
It's all about how we're gonna build a safe community where people are accepted as they are, and then all their stories are safely shared. And then our concerns are gonna be carried by our caring. So I have three steps for the belonging community. That one is that actually sharing and accepting the challenges and so build a safe relationship and then getting aware of the concerns and hearing it and caring it. But also, we don't want to dominate or we don't want to conquer it, but we want to be resilient with it. And then third step is celebration, which means just celebrate who I am. And then we empower that celebration. Let me tell you this way. We are really fighting against the culture only value the success. And if there's some relapse or failure, it's a shame and we need to hide it. It's everywhere.
Especially in business.
Yeah, business, government, and in the management style, everything, we only need to make a certain advertisement of our success and talent so we can attract more people to us. But I want to more emphasize that the servant leadership and how much the leadership of a character is very important. And I think I still believe that humanistic management approach rather than a very engineering and type of the management style, which is dominant nowadays. So I really want to emphasize that humanistic management start that with my being vulnerable and honest to myself. And maybe I know some people can say, "Oh, you are like that," and then I cannot respect you. You are not quite good to be a leader, right? I want to fight against it because when we really know our strengths but also weakness, we know how we gonna make a team together better, and we know how we can make people get all included and safe, not worry about I'm going to be fired and somebody's talking about me behind the backs. That takes time because it's countercultural, but we need to build that community of belonging. And once you build it, and you're going to have a really great success actually ahead we are looking for. But we need to have that period of struggling and resilience. The old theory of a group process talking about this, right? Forming, storming, norming, and performing. I found from all people in America that everybody want to skip the storming. I'm so sorry. If you don't go through storming, you cannot really have a solid norming and performing ahead. That's why the paradox works here together. That when we learn how to go through this paradoxical juggling, in traumatology, we call nowadays pendulation. We need to go that really brings the resilience and maturity as a person who I am and as a team who we are, we can work together. Without adversity, we cannot really go further or thrive. So I think in my mindset, I came from South Korea. In South Korean proverb, we say, when you are young, just try to buy any struggling, painstaking process, which means when you are young, you have a time and power, just jump into the painful experiences and you survive and you're going to thrive. I love that ancient wisdom. So we, instead of try to see only positive side, only successful side, only attractional side, however, we need to be totally honest. We are not perfect but we have a hope. And then there's a certain things we need to manage it because of a pain and failure. We need to really bring it to the light and then we share. And then although we cannot fix everything, we're gonna here together as a belonging community. We're gonna be resilient. And it brings more enormous power than you never imagined because when people think, oh, I'm not ashamed to be here and I don't have to afraid of being in failure, that brings a lot of successful management and teamwork, which can be applied to any community, any sector, any business, any phase where people work together, I believe.
You said something really interesting that like my brain just went, yep, because this was the conversation I was having with a group earlier. You said, we love to ignore the storming. And I think we do that because for most of us, we're so afraid of conflict, right? Like if you and I disagree, then we must not like each other versus the truth of it of disagreement is where really beautiful things happen. It pushes us both to think from, oh, I never thought of it from that lens. Oh, this is a good point. And by ignoring that storming point, it also, I think, in a lot of ways allows us to ignore safety, which you were talking about as one of the foundational principles. And then that's why we don't feel like we belong. We can't disagree, we don't have safety. And then it's like, oh, I have to be my fake self in this space. I have to be my pretend self. And then doing that, as we know, for long periods of time, you begin to lose yourself. You begin to lose touch with who you are.
We all survived the pandemic. Woohoo, we are all winners. In the pandemic time, there was a very famous anonymous poem I used to cite a lot. One line I always quote is, we are in the same storm, but we are not in the same boat. So we need to understand that to fill the gap, we need to appreciate the diversity, but also we need to learn how to come together to go through the storm together. And again, this is not failure, this is an opportunity that we can see the human potential that can really make us more than I thought or I expected. And so that's kind of very important. Even when I talk about celebration, we celebrate the character, which means patience, perseverance, kindness. When I talk about people and when I ask people, I go, hey, what you can celebrate today? Everybody think about where I can find my victory, my gold medal. Whether you had a medal or not, or even you relapsed, you still come to the community. You still go to the self-help groups. You still go to recovery groups. You still visit your counselor. You know, your patience, your perseverance. We need to celebrate it. Why not? That's kind of my actual sorrow that we have so many things we can celebrate every day just as because who we are and our name title as a survivor and I'm faithful and I never give up and I'm resilient and I'm persevering. And I hope that we bring the culture we can really celebrate, bring gold medal for those amazing characters, which I believe all the listeners of your podcast already have many gold medals already.
I just appreciate that so much because for me, what you're saying resonates differently than the idea of toxic positivity, right? Like we never even ever talk about the bad or we don't look at the bad, but instead what you're offering us is there's also a lot of space in business and faith and communities of all kinds that we forget to celebrate. We're always looking at what we don't have. How could we get more customers? How could we help more people? How could we save more families? How could we get more kids with better attendance, right? And all of these things that we talk about, the problems that people are listening are facing every day. But in that, we forget to see the celebrations. We forget to see the great and positive impact we have. So I just appreciate that idea of increasing the celebration every day, seeing something that we can celebrate, even in this really hard work.
Especially if you look at the faith community or a lot of the executive leadership on the corporate business or school system and government system, we are all in this toxic positivity, as you explained well, which means that we just want to cover up in a positive way how to decorate it. Although there's no real evidence for that, there's no realistic expectation for that. And in that sense, that's why I think everybody needs to have some solitude, time of a moment to being alone or being with God or higher being, and where they can be very honest to themselves. They can be very honestly accepted by higher being. That's very important. That's a great foundation of a real trauma-informed leader who can lead other people, other team members in that way. Okay, I'm honest with me. You can honest with yourself. We all can honest and we all can accept it. That's why it's very important because a lot of people, I'm very sad that even the church, they just want to talk about the victory in Jesus' name. But let me tell you, to me, Jesus is the person who cried and who didn't have a mega church. And actually, he was failure on the cross from the worldly eyes. And then another scripture, not the gospel scripture, but Hebrews tells us Jesus went through that suffering so he can comfort us, encourage us when we go through the suffering. Man, that's a true the Messiah. That's true the Savior who were with us, became like us, and went through what we are going through. So he knows us. When I feel alone, when I feel like nobody knows me, I'm the alone, I'm the only failure, I'm so ashamed, and there's no other choice to giving up my life. There is my Lord who say, I was there. I'm with you. And then that leadership, that servant leadership, incarnative leadership, who can become like me? I hope that we can really establish that type of the leadership who can be compassionate, empathetic, and who can come to those who feel like they are failure. So we, again, pursue more of a resilient teamwork and management in our community rather than just the success and gold medal oriented toxic positivity mentality.
Okay, this is why now the listeners know why Sanghoon will be with us more than one time on this podcast. He doesn't know it yet, but I'll be sure to have him more than one time. So, Sanghoon, as you're talking about this, as we're getting kind of closer to the end of our time, tell us what gives you hope about the future of communities you're working with. I think that's a message many of us in this space, exactly for what you're saying, because we feel like we're suffering. Some of the listeners that are listening feel like they're the only ones in their community talking trauma informed, trying to get people to change directions that they're rowing. So tell us what gives you hope about our future and in the future of the communities you're working with.
When I started this movement and work, I thought nobody gonna listen, and no church leader and no other community leader.
Same.
We talked about it many years ago, right? The principals in the schools, no, they're not gonna listen. District superintendents, no way. But you know what? I found there are some people, a few and more than a few people who really listen and they start to convert their lens of their leadership. And then they really join the movement together. And I see that my hope is found when I see that tons, but a few the leaders and people to come together and then really forming our own trauma informed community together. Again, this is very important because a lot of the leadership mentalities, okay, I like the training, I like the program, so I'm going to impart it in my group, my team, my business got successful. It's not us and them model. The model of the, this is the model of the we are all in this together. It's the risk taking, it's the vulnerable, but when you do it and you can see a few people are going to join the you, and then you feel that like, wow, this is my home, my safe place. This is my tribe. This is my people. And what I find all these people come together, they have one thing common is that they are not being afraid, being humbled, and they're actually humble servant leaders. And I think that's what we need because in this very polarized and very divisive nation in every sectors, I think somebody can just be the humble and then, all right, there's my fault. I admit it. And I'm embrace your fault. And then let's do it instead of trying to bragging and then attacking and criticizing. Let's just be honest and be vulnerable together. And there's nothing to hide behind me.
Can we all vote for you in November, Sanghoon? Because that's exactly what I'm looking for in my leader, though. I mean, I'm looking for this in my government and leadership and governments and politics, but I'm also looking in systems and school districts and home shelters and human service areas. Is somebody who just says, you're right. We got that wrong. I mean, you and I've talked about this in my time in foster care. I remember this very vividly. You asked me once, what is the thing that you think would need to change in foster care the most? And I said, the one thing I've been looking for more than 30 years now is an apology. Some say we got it wrong, and now let's go do something. It's that simple thing of acknowledging that acknowledgement piece and that humble of like, that's true. And now let's go change it together.
Yeah. However, interestingly, that's another paradox. In order to be humble, you need to have a humongous courage. So that's the thing that I really want to see. Because when we say, oh, you should be humble, people think, oh my gosh, you just want to knock me out. No, that's not the point. Actually, most of people need a lot of encouragement so they can have enough courage finally open up themselves honestly. So I just want to say that being humble is not really kind of oh, I'm going to be weakened and I'm going to look like a failure. Humble is actually, I'm going to be courageous than anybody else. So I can be really admire the respect the leader. People are going to want to follow me. That's really trauma informed, resilient, and humble leader we are looking for in every sector.
And I think to your point, the thing that we hear, and I know you hear this all the time too, in all kinds of communities, systems, is that people aren't transparent. And that also goes in line with this thing about being humble and courageous. Okay. Before we do our quick fire questions, we always end on the same three quick fires around here, Sanghoon. But before we do that, is there any piece of advice you might give somebody who's listening that if they're thinking they want to start something new in their workspace or in their own church or in their own community in some way, a piece of advice that you would give them to begin creating a space of belonging and healing? Or maybe a pitfall to avoid if you have one of those as well. But can you think of something if someone wants to start the work somewhere where they might begin?
I think we were talking about, some people talking about global warming, and I heard that if you want to fix that, everybody stop what they're doing now. And we did a little bit in the pandemic, and we could see some impact or effect. The reason I'm talking about that is actually we need to have power and courage to pause what I'm doing and be in silence. And then I want to really recommend and suggest or even advise to everybody who want to try to this journey is take your enough time. And we are in a horrible toxic culture, which is all about quick fix. I hope that take a time. Quick fix doesn't mean we can have a real fix, because real fix takes a profound fixation of a root cause, which it takes a lot of time and layers of a healing process. So I just want to say, hey, just do a little by little every day, one step at a moment and one thing at a time, and just to kind of make a journal out of this. So you might see change in 3 months, but if you do constantly, maybe in 3 years, you compare years ago you and who you are today, you're going to be really encouraged. So I really want to suggest more of a patience and then slow process of this.
Yes, I love that. I talk about in my trainings quite often the Swahili phrase that I heard when I was climbing Kilimanjaro. Slowly, slowly. This really is the tortoise and the hare. And when the tortoise goes slowly, intentionally, thoughtfully, and ends up further ahead often than the person who's going so much faster. Sanghoon, I cannot wait to have you back on the show because I actually didn't get to any of the questions I had for you. So this means you'll have to come back and join us. But before we go, quickly, our three quick fire questions. What's the latest book, show, podcast that's caught your attention? What are you reading, binge watching, or streaming that stood out to you?
At the moment, I'm reading the book Pivot by Scott McKnight and Laura and Behringer. Pivot is actually Scott's the first book, the Tov. Tov in Hebrew is good. Actually, he, through his life and church experiences, he really talking about the toxic and narcissistic leadership. And he want to see that church really change to be more holistic. And he doesn't talk about trauma informed, but pretty much the same thing about the leadership based on the character and Christ likeness. I'm very interested in all types of the leadership development, which is more about character rather than talents. And those things are fascinating me.
And so, if you could have dinner then with a historical figure or contemporary leader, who would you choose and what one question would you want to ask them during your dinner?
I don't have anything to do with the politics, but what I see interesting is that nowadays, if both sides have a background as Abraham Lincoln behind there as a picture, and I thought like that's very interesting. If I have a dinner with Abraham Lincoln, I want to ask him, when you watch both sides and they have your picture as a frame behind them, how do you feel about it? What do you want to say to them?
What are your thoughts on what's happening? So, also tell us what's a hobby or activity that you're totally engrossed in that's filling your bucket up right now for you? What's something that you just love doing? Can't get enough of it. You wish you had more time for it.
I'm a city boy. I grew up with urban culture. I mean, South Korea, and when I was growing up, it's really bad and very poor. But still, I'm very urban boy. But with my own seeking for my own self care and resilience, I really appreciate more of a solitude to prayer and then my walk, whenever I can walk. I'm living in Arizona, Phoenix right now, which you cannot even walk every night. I want to say out of all this, really being acquainted with the nature it really helps me. Even you can one plant in your dining table or one bird singing on the tree in the street or your backyard. I really appreciate the whatever brings life, spiritual life or biological life or any kind of zoe, any life is big to me nowadays. I want to learn more how I can appreciate the life. In that sense, being acquainted with the nature and natural setting really helps me for my deep breathing and also my healing, but also learning and humbling myself before the all creation.
So we'll include in our podcast all the links on how our listeners can find you, find your website, learn more about the Faithful City. Any last words for our listeners before we wrap today? Any last things you want to share? Anything you need to promote? Anything you need to tell them about? Your own podcast, right? You're doing a podcast. So we'll put links to Weave and Cleave. If they want to subscribe to your podcast, they can hear more from you and some amazing guests you've had on.
I just want to say, hello, it's all about presence and process rather than performance or productivity. And I love Shan because whenever you and I here in the coming together, I don't have anything to be guarded. And I don't know you much, but our several times presence together, processing together, even helps me my healing. So I really hope people really value that the power of being with.
I value my time with you always because I feel very similarly. We've had that conversation. You alluded to it earlier that sometimes in this work, you can feel like you're the only one. And what we both realized is, wait, there's lots of us. We just might not live next door to each other all the time. And so we've got to seek each other out in different ways. And that was really the crux of this podcast was I didn't want people to feel like they were the only ones, that it was their organization that had it all wrong and everyone else had it figured out, or their church or their community or their school, and that we're all struggling and we're all doing amazing things all at the same time. And we're going to take one step forward. That's kind of the motto of our show, right? Just take one little step and we'll see where it takes us. So thank you again, Dr. Yu, for being with us. I look forward to our next time together. For everyone listening, we hope you enjoyed and we'll see you next time. Thanks. Mindful Management, Creating a Trauma-Informed Work Environment is brought to you by Chefalo Consulting. To learn more about Chefalo Consulting and our trauma-informed change management and professional development solutions, please visit chefaloconsulting.com. That's Chefalo, CHEFALO, consulting.com. Make sure you don't miss these transformative conversations by subscribing to Mindful Management wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for listening. And remember, change happens one step at a time.